This is the Seahawkers podcast pre-draft episode. I'm Brandon Schultz of the Military Seahawkers, and joining me, because we are coming up on the NFL draft at the end of the month, my good buddy, all the way from England, Rob Staton. How you doing?
Good, Brandon. Really enjoying this this pre-draft period. It is quite an exciting time where you just think about the players you could have, and I think it is the most enjoyable time because what generally happens is that all of those players that you imagine could be in Seattle end up playing for different teams, and because you can't draft everybody,
right?
So even if you pick 2-3 guys that you really like, there'll be like sort of 20 others that are going to be going to other teams. So this is the best period when you can imagine them all playing for Seattle.
Well, I think that John Schneider may want to draft everybody because when we talked about a month ago, it was going into the NFL Combine. And not a lot had happened. There's been a lot that's happened just over these past few weeks. Russell Wilson gets traded. Bobby Wagner goes to the Rams. This is what I'm thinking with the Russell Wilson trade. John Schneider's acquiring picks. DK Metcalf being talked about as potentially on the trade block too. And I think for those of us who didn't quite imagine that Russell Wilson being traded, I expected if he were to get traded, it would have been for even more than what they got. But maybe seeing what Deshaun Watson went to the Browns for, maybe that's just the market for star quarterbacks. What was, when you saw that go down, I know you were excited because it means that the relevancy of the potential picks, you're not talking about pick 41 anymore. We're talking about a top 10 pick, Rob. What did you think of the compensation for Russell Wilson, and was it fair for what the Seahawks got?
Yeah, I thought it was a terrific deal. I think having pick number 40 is the same as having a third first-round pick, in my opinion, in this draft. And the reason why is, let's just say that they didn't have 40. Let's say that it was a third first-rounder. It might look better written down. 3 first-round picks and 3 players might look better. But you're talking about a first-round pick that you won't get to use for 2 years that could, in all likelihood, be at the end of the first round anyway, and it could be in a weaker draft. And right. The great thing about having pick number 40 is that the Seahawks knew who was going to be generally available in that sort of range when they made that offer. So the way I see it is they've got more information on that pick. I suspect that they believe they can get a player with a first round grade on their board in that pick, because I think it's that kind of draft where you're going to get players that you really, really like. The top of round 2, they might be able to trade back into the back end of the first round and make it a first round pick anyway. So I thought pick 40 was more valuable than a first round pick in 2 years' time. I think on top of that, you get 2 extra firsts. One of them is in the top 10. You get 3 players, and okay, people have got a lot of opinions on Drew Lock. I understand that. You've got Noah Fant, who just a couple of years ago was a top 20 pick in his own right. And what would he have brought if you were going to trade for him? Would he have been, if you were to make an offer just for him at Denver, he may well have been a second or third round pick, to prize him away from Denver. You don't know. I've not studied him that closely, but he was a very highly rated player when he came out, very athletic tight end. Shelby Harris is a good football player that you've brought in. You've needed somebody who can provide some interior pressure. He can do that. So I think overall it was a really good trade. I didn't necessarily want the Seahawks to go down a road where they were trading away a franchise quarterback. My preference would have been some different changes at the top and going in a different direction. But I just wanted to see something different, Brandon. Whether that was change a head coach and GM and you rally behind Russell Wilson, or you trade Russell Wilson and you rebuild this team. I just didn't want to see the status quo again. I could not watch another season like the last 2, 3, 4 because I didn't think the Seahawks were going anywhere. And it was just like Groundhog Day every single year. So seeing something different, having a draft to look forward to, having some new players to get to know, I think that's a good thing. And I'm totally prepared for them to be bad in 2022. I think this is a long-term approach now, and I'm completely fine with that.
Yeah, I'm also prepared for them to be bad. Part of that is due to the QB situation. It has me questioning, though, a month ago when we were looking at the quarterback class, it's, the discussion is, well, it's not the greatest. Well, don't you wait and maybe make that deal when there is a better quarterback class, but then maybe you're not getting the top 10 picks. Like as we saw last year, I think the Bears having Justin Fields fall to them. If the Seahawks could go back and do things differently, would they make the trade with the Bears, knowing that maybe Justin Fields would be available to them at that spot? It seems like teams are more likely to take a chance on some of the younger players in a class where you think that it's kind of a loaded quarterback class. Do you see any guys in this class that now, upon further review, knowing that they have a top 10 pick, a player that could be available to them that could maybe turn things around a little bit closer than in time than you're thinking?
Before I answer that, I think there was no choice, frankly. I just think that you got to a point now where Russell Wilson, I think we've seen the report that he'd basically scouted 14 alternative teams in the last few weeks to find his next home.
Right.
I think he had one foot out the door. It was absolutely there was absolutely no way whatsoever that John Schneider was going to sit down with Mark Rodgers and thrash out a new contract within the next 12 months. That was not going to. It was an impossible. The relationship has completely. If it was ever there, Brandon, it had just completely gone. I mean, I've heard things that just make it extremely clear that they were never going to do another contract ever in a million years. So if you
it would take a change on the top, right? When you're talking about changes at the top, you're talking about new general manager, a new coach, and you keep Russell. And that
was the only way that Russell Wilson was going to be staying in Seattle, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's proven to be that's the way it was, and they had to do something now. So they, with Carroll and Schneider staying, Russell moves on, and I think it's good for Russell. Russell gets what he wants, and I think Pete and John have been saying they're back in their wheelhouse, and I think that's right. And I think they are. And I'm glad, because I do think that I don't think they're ever going to be great maintainers. And I think it's very difficult to maintain, a winning team for a number of years where you basically just hold on to two very expensive players, which is what they did in the reset in 2018, and then try and rebuild everything else. And I think they've shown how difficult that is. I think they're going to be better. I mean, I don't know how much longer they're both going to be doing this for. I mean, Pete Carroll's 70, but I think they're better at building than maintaining. So I think that this is good for them, to have this opportunity to have all these picks to see if they can build another great team. As for the quarterbacks, I think you've just got to embrace what this is. And they did that very well, when they took over in 2010. They had 2 first-round picks. They didn't go and just draft Jimmy Clausen, at number 6 or number 14. They said, no, he's not the answer. So we're not going to draft him. And then in 2011, they didn't go and draft Andy Dalton or Colin Kaepernick or one of these other players that were available. They said, no, we've got to build the team, and we're going to be patient. We're going to accept a year of Tavares Jackson as the starter, and we're going to do this right. We are going to draft a quarterback that can win with us. And the thing is that if you draft, let's say you just draft a linebacker, for example, with a high pick, and it doesn't work out, people just go, they missed on that pick. When you miss on a quarterback, it's worse. You are judged on the decisions you make at quarterback. So you've got to get it right. And I think what we're basically in now is 2011. They are sort of, Drew Lock or Geno Smith is going to be the answer to Tavares Jackson, and they are going to play the slow game. I think they may draft a quarterback at some point, but I don't think they're going to force it. I see I don't think there's any chance whatsoever that they're going to take a quarterback at number 9. Absolutely zero. That's how I approach it. If I'm wrong, I'll definitely hold my hands up and go, wow, I got that wrong. But I see no shot whatsoever that they're going to take a quarterback at 9. If Matt Corral was there in, the second round, maybe they'd consider it. If they do trade DK Metcalf and end up with a low first round pick, let's say in the 20s, they might consider something like that. That is a possibility to me. And look, could Matt Corral be a franchise quarterback? I think he's got some skills that you could say. He can play on time. He can get the ball to where it needs to go. He can, plant his feet, throw with a good, strong base. He generates a lot of torque because of that base. His throwing mechanics, he's got a real whip-like motion that when he plants his feet, squares his shoulders and throws, which he can do. He's got as good an arm as anybody else in this draft class. He's got a lot of talent. Now, there are some accuracy issues. When he doesn't get his technique right, he fades passes. He can sort of lean back and short arm passes, and he misses the target. There's these overthrow. There's some really bad overthrows on tape as well. And it all sort of combines to a player who shouldn't be starting in year 1. And if they do draft, whether it's Matt Corral or any of these quarterbacks, they ain't going to start in year 1. None of them are ready to start in year 1. They're all going to sit behind Geno Smith and Drew Lock or whoever else is there. But then again, that's it. You're playing the long game. And because they all have to sit Brandon, that's why I think what they're going to do is they are going to build the roster up. This is a building draft. This is a foundational draft class. I think they'll probably take a quarterback later on. I would suggest Jack Cohen or Caleb Ellerbee as the two names to keep an eye on. And then I think next year, when you have 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and who knows what else, depending on what happens with DK Metcalf, you will be in prime position to go and get a really good quarterback. And the two that I would mention the most are Bryce Young and Will Levis.
Where do you come out on actually trading DK Metcalf? Because I have a problem with, just like with Russ, I have a problem with getting rid of good players for draft picks, especially when they're, toward the top. If you're talking about guys that are right on the margins, I think a player of the level of Shaquille Griffin, you don't necessarily know if you want to pay long-term, but there may be some trade value there. And I feel like that's the perfect kind of trade level. With DK Metcalf, you need to have elite receivers on your team, especially if you want to be competitive. And you need to find somebody to replace him ultimately. So for what you get from him, can you replace that level of talent? Where do you come out on it?
I'm very open-minded to anything. When you are a team that is entering a situation where you're basically rebuilding everything, which is what they are really. When you say rebuild, it doesn't have to be literally every position expansion franchise element. It's a significant rebuild. They are rebuilding O-line, front seven, quarterback, secondary, with safety being the exception. You are rebuilding everything. I think everything should be on the table.
I get a sense that it's more of a full rebuild. You've named your new podcast, Rob, The Rebuild. The focus is on this.
I mean, it is. And I don't know. See, I interviewed Mike Florio yesterday, and I asked him, what's wrong with the word rebuild? If it is a rebuild, I don't think the Seahawks fans are any less likely to turn up at the Lumen Field because it's called a rebuild. If you say we're competing all the way, they're not. Seahawks fans aren't stupid. They know where the team is right now. I mean, on DK, here's the thing: is there's so many different strands to this. First of all, it's what's out there. I mean, I'm listening to anything. I mean, if the new Jake Heaps said on 710 Seattle Sports that he thought the Jets would be willing to give up 10 and one of their early second round picks. Now, if you're talking about getting the 10th overall pick and let's say the 38th overall pick, I mean, I think that's a great deal. That is a tremendous offer and would be very tempting. So you have to think about it.
Well, especially, when you think about that too, if you have 9 and 10, you could think about even getting into the top 5 if you don't think an offensive tackle is going to fall to you, if you don't think a top 5 type pass rusher is going to fall to you. You could combine those and
I think quantity of picks is a great thing in this draft. And, I think if you've got 9 and 10, what it would give you the flexibility to do is take somebody at 9, move down from 9. And so you use a top 10 pick, but then you acquire more stock by moving down with the other pick. I think that's a great thing. You would have 38, 40, and 41, in a brilliant draft in the second round. You could create a really good team, with these picks. And what it would be in that case is you're taking DK Metcalf, who is a good player, good young player, good age, quality player, but you might be turning him into 2 players who help you create the kind of team that you want, which in Pete Carroll's case is one that's going to play well up front, which is going to, run the ball very well, create pressure with 4, which is, essentially and run the ball effectively. That's what he wants. And so that's one element of it. I mean, the thing is, there's all sorts of different things with this DK Metcalf topic. I mean, here's one that I don't think's really been discussed much, is if you could go back in time, they paid Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas and
Cam
and Cliff and Michael Bobby. and Bobby Wan and everybody. They kept all those players together and won absolutely nothing after they'd paid all of those players. Now, the idea of trading, say, Richard Sherman after the Super Bowl win would have been, a heinous crime to the Seahawks back in the day. But when you actually think about it, it may have been the best thing. I think we should be more open-minded to the idea of if you can, get the best of a player and then turn them around and then try and find the next one, then that's it. And look, you don't want to get rid of everybody all of the time. But, we have seen in Seattle some really good players who've signed second contracts and in some cases third contracts. And we got the best of them in their opening contract. Now, I'm not saying that's, with DK Metcalf, you'll be taking a gamble because if he goes somewhere else and ends up becoming the best receiver in the NFL, then it's a bad deal for you. But if he just ends up being what he is now, which is a player who is very good, but he's not impossible to cover in a way that Julio Jones and let's say Mike Evans is impossible to cover. He still has concentration drops. He still has flaws in his game that were existing when he was a rookie. And 3 years in, he's still not fixed some of those issues. So is what we are seeing with DK, peak DK Metcalf? Maybe so. And I don't know. I mean, if they paid him $20 million a year and kept him, I wouldn't criticize the Seahawks. But equally, I won't criticize the Seahawks if they turn him into a haul and then say, we're going to take those picks and that money and we're going to make our defensive line and offensive line really good. I don't really know how that's a problem either because I'm completely open-minded to everything. I just want the Seahawks to be good again. I'm not attached to any player. I think it's, I follow the Seattle Seahawks, not the Seattle DK Metcalfs. and I want the Seahawks to be good. And if they think that, having a whole bunch of picks to build up their front seven and their offensive line and their running game will help them win, great. I'm comfortable with either scenario, frankly. And I think that we should give them, if they trade him and there's enough people out there saying, keep an eye on this. And there's enough teams out there like Green Bay's GM and coach like, yeah, we need a downfield receiver. And we're going to be very aggressive to do that. And the Jets are like, yeah, we'll be very aggressive too. You think this is kind of trending one way here. And the Seahawks are using the whole, we intend to keep him, words again. I think there's a reasonable chance that they may turn him into, I'm not sure they'll get that Jets deal, by the way. I think it might be that they'll get the Devontae Adams trade, 22 and then a second round pick for DK Metcalf. And frankly, I could give you a whole bunch of names that we should be excited about with those two picks.
Well, it could also be beneficial in contract negotiations for the team to have these kind of discussions too. Just looking back at the Russell Wilson contract, part of the thing with the no trade clause is you are getting the player cheaper when they have a no trade clause in their contract because that benefits them. They get to choose where they go next. A general manager like John Schneider doesn't want a no trade clause because he wants to have all the teams available to be able to trade a particular player. Maybe they could have traded Russ to Washington, for example, instead of trading him to Denver and had more draft picks available through that type of deal. Russ could veto that, obviously, and he picked Denver. I congratulate you, Rob, because this is an inflection point in that you did not change your blog to the Denver Broncos draft blog. Because I think that when a big player leaves like this, I see segments of the fan base that say, "Oh, well, I guess I'm more of a Russell Wilson fan than a Seahawks fan. I'm gonna go follow the Broncos now." People are different.
Yeah. I mean, that's one word to describe them. If you're going to do that, I don't get that. And like when I see some of the things on social media, I must admit maybe it's just an American sports fandom thing versus an English fan. Over here in the Premier League, players change teams all the time. It's very rare that a player in a soccer team over here will stay for years and years and years or spend their, be a one team man. Right. That's almost never happens now.
I think it could be generational though too.
True, but I never been attached to a player. I memean, like I'd never set out to buy a player's jersey, for example. If they did a jersey without any name or number on the back, I'd probably buy that. It's about the logo. It's about, or as we would say over here, the badge. You support the badge, not the player. And for me, it's not even about Carroll and Schneider. It's about the Seattle Seahawks. That's who the team are, and I want to see them do well. And I wish Russell Wilson. I mean, I'm not one of these fans who's look. It would be beneficial to the Seahawks if Russell gets injured in week one.
Well, I don't wish injury upon him. I just want them to be really bad next year, so that way we get a better pick.
I mean, I neither anticipate them being really bad. I don't think they'll be really good either, but I don't think they'll be really bad. And I'm not going to wish and root for them to lose every week either. I'm going to be I'm just going to wait and see, and then at the end of the year, find out what pick we get. And that's sort of my approach to it. But I wish Russell the best. Good luck, Russ. And I want the Seahawks to be good. And I'm prepared to take a bit of short-term pain this year. I've not felt this way about the team in a few years. I feel energized and excited about the draft. I'm looking forward to seeing a new group of players. Sometimes change is a good thing, and to see a whole bunch of new guys come in and create a new core rather than watching older, aging players who've not done it for a few years. I mean, I know, Brandon, you are a big Bobby Wagner fan, and I see a lot of people out there, in mourning that he's kind of gone to the LA Rams. I'm thinking, great, that's fantastic. Run a screen at him, because the guy did not play well last year. I hate to say it, and I know I'm going to get a lot of abuse for this. I think he's one of the most overrated players in the NFL.
Wow. Wow.
Honestly, he gets so much. I've never seen a team press corps, nearly every single press conference. Pete, can you just explain to us how good Bobby Wagner is? That question kept coming up over and over again. And I'm sat there thinking, okay, look, the guy's had a great career. He's been a great Seahawks player. I'm not saying he's a bad player at all. He has been a really good linebacker for the Seahawks. But he's going to be in the Hall of Fame, no doubt about it. He's been a consistent performer, I would say, in an era without many great linebackers. And I think that's essentially what he is. I don't think he's better than Walter Jones, like some people have suggested. I don't think his impact on the Seahawks even gets close to the impact of Marshawn Lynch or Cam Chancellor. And I don't think the Seahawks win the Super Bowl without Russell Wilson. So
get my linebacker's name out your bleeping mouth, Rob.
Well, you can't. You're too far away to come and give me a slap. So listen, it sounds awful, doesn't it? And this is what I've been talking about with the draft, Brandon, because if you push back on a player, it sounds like you don't like them. When someone says Tyler Linderbaum's a top 10 pick and you go, no, he's not. He's nowhere near a top 10 pick. People think, well, you don't like Tyler Linderbaum. It's not that. I like Tyler Linderbaum. I just don't think he's a top 10 pick. And with Bobby Wagner, I like Bobby Wagner. I respect Bobby Wagner. I really appreciate
You just don't think he's
Bobby
the
Wagner.
greatest Seahawk ever. Okay.
I do not think he's the greatest Seahawk ever. And I think some of the praise that he's received over the years, I do not think he's played well. I don't think he's played as well as people have made out for 2 or 3 years. I think since that last contract extension, his play has been very underwhelming. He's not made anywhere near enough impact plays.
Oh, for the amount of for the Seahawks, to expect the Seahawks to have paid him $20 million, which is what he was due for this upcoming season, and even to say that he wasn't really due that money because he got all of his guaranteed money. So he got all the money he was due. This was just the 1 year at the end of the deal that, if they can trade him, then that works. Or if they can change how that was structured, he's not making $20 million. He might get $20 million guaranteed out of his deal with the Rams. I would have been it hurts me for him to be with the Rams. That's all. I don't like it. It's like Sherman going to the 49ers. I don't like it.
But here's the thing I totally get that. But, there are players leaving Seattle and they're making those decisions. And I don't understand that because, Calais Campbell, I get the sense, has never really wanted to play for another NFC West team. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't think Larry Fitzgerald would have done either.
No.
I don't think there's any chance
Matt
that Larry
Hasselbeck said that he had the opportunity to go to the 49ers and chose not to. And I think it's different for Bobby because that's his hometown. So I can understand it to that extent. I think they both tarnished their legacy a little bit. I have to say, by going to rival teams to finish their career. With respect to Earl, he went to the other end of the country and played for a team in a different conference in the AFC, in a team that really suited him. And Bobby Wagner spent all that time talking to the Ravens and now has gone to the LA Rams and is going to play the Seahawks twice a year. Russell's gone to Denver. I mean, I don't think Russell Wilson would have gone to the Niners or the Rams or the Cardinals either. They've gone to the other conference. They've got away from Seattle. I personally, it somewhat tarnished everything about their Seahawks history by going to play for another team in the NFC West. But that's their choice. And frankly, I'm more interested about who's
which linebacker is actually going to be filling those gaps, rather than hesitating and watching the running back run through it or getting blocked out. I'm more interested to know who's going to blast up a screen, because if I have to watch Seahawks defend screen passes like they did last season, I think I'm going to do a Will Smith. It was atrocious. And they've got a chance now in this draft to get a very attack-minded, young, physical linebacker who's going to put a helmet on somebody. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing who it is.
Well, yeah, let's talk about some of those guys who might be available. Let's start with their top 10 pick at number 9. I think, yes, we know that John Schneider, he likes to trade down. They do it with, gosh, when haven't they traded down with their first round pick? When it was Russell Okung there in the top 10. But which player that could be available in that top 10 is Rob Staton running to the podium and making the announcement for that pick?
Probably Jermaine Johnson of Florida State. I think he's the player that I'd be most excited about. I think that if obviously if Trayvon Walker or Aidan Hutchinson was there, I think you could even make a case for Evan Neal. I think that they will be run to the podium types. I don't think they're going to be there. I'm still a fan of Kayvon Thibodeau's tape, but I watched an interview with him at the Oregon Pro Day yesterday, and even I'm starting to lose a bit of faith in terms of the things that he says are just ridiculous. Like, he didn't do a vertical jump at his pro day, and someone asked him why, and he was like, well, I just didn't want to do one because your thighs might get injured. And I was like, just do a vertical jump, man. And he's there. It's like, which are you going to do any official visits? Who have you got to visit? Oh yeah, I'm going to do visits. Yeah, but who you? So how many? Oh, 5. Which 5? I'm only doing the top 5. I'm only doing the top 5.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, he needs to learn when to shut the hell up, frankly. And someone needs to just take him to one side and go, Kayvon, just stop saying these things. Because if you're saying these things in the team meetings as well, you're just costing yourself money, because he just gives off the impression of somebody who just doesn't quite get it and is a bit self-centered. That's just the vibe that you get. And people go, whenever you say anything like that, people think you're being really unfair. But that's just the vibe I get. I think someone's going to take him in the top 7 picks anyway, so he'll be gone anyway. I think of the realistic options that are there at 9, I think Jermaine Johnson,
the pass rusher out of Florida State,
extremely quick off the edge, ran a 1.5 10-yard split to back that up.
Oh,
very, very physical in the the running game, great with his hands. I always think that it's one thing to just be able to run around offensive tackles in college football because you're just quicker than they are. College, a lot of college tackles won't even be undrafted free agents. You can run around those guys and create sacks. Can you use your hands well, engage, disengage, do speed to power? Have you got a variety of moves? Jermaine Johnson has got all of those things. So I think that he would be a terrific player. He's a heart and soul player. I think if you bring him in and put him across from Darrell Taylor, you could be looking at the future leadership core of your team with Johnson and Taylor and Quandre Diggs and people like that. I think that's where you would get your identity from. So I think he would be a great shout. But I have to say, Brandon, I'm not sure he's going to be there. Mm-hmm. And I think if he's gone and Kayvon Thibodeau's gone, there's no way that Walker and Hutchinson are going to make it. And I don't think Neal and Kwonu will either. And I'm not sure Sauce Gardner will either. And if that is how sort of the top 7 or 8 shape out, then the Seahawks have got a choice, in my opinion. They've got a choice of taking someone like Derek Stingley Jr. in the top 10 and having a potentially great cornerback, although there's been a few question marks about him, or the option is to trade down. And that's something I've been talking about on the blog this week, because I just don't want to keep talking about the same thing over and over again. I think if the top pass rushers are gone, and if they don't want to take Stingley at 9, then I think there's a reasonable chance that they will move back into the teens and go in a different direction.
It would be wild to see the Seahawks pick a corner with a top 10 pick, but yeah, if you're talking about Gardner or Stingley, that's intriguing to me.
Yeah, I think it is intriguing because Derek Stingley a couple of years ago, people would have said he would have been in with a shout of being the number 1 overall pick, if not 2 or 3, depending on the quarterback situation. And LSU has completely collapsed. He's had a few injury issues. He's maybe not played great. I mean, this is the weird thing is people are saying he's going to fall into the teens. And then, Lance Zierlein on his NFL.com profile is saying he had a good, not great season. I'm thinking, well, is that really, if a player plays good, not great, but has shown greatness, why is he being knocked that much? Is it plays a premium position?
You want a steady progression toward awesome, Rob. You can't have any down years.
But I think that's the problem now, in the NFL, is that these guys who have excelled early in their careers as freshmen and get taught up, by the time 3 years has passed, if they are not just getting better and better and better, then people sour on them. And it's often the players who have these, that sort of come in late, who have a good final season. I mean, people forget. I mean, I don't know, Brandon, I don't know how closely you follow, like the Big Ten, for example. Aidan Hutchinson missed most of last season with a serious leg injury. Have you ever heard anybody talk about that?
No.
He had a serious leg injury last year. And he didn't declare for the draft. As a consequence, he came back to Michigan. Now, no one ever mentions that because Aidan Hutchinson played well in his final college season, had his best season, helped them get to the playoffs. People talk only positive things about Aidan Hutchinson. But if Derek Stingley's best season was 2 years ago, and then he's had a couple of injury issues, nothing as serious as the injury Aidan Hutchinson had, he's now falling into the teens. So will the Seahawks take a cornerback early? I don't know. They've never been in a position to take somebody as good as Derek Stingley. I think he would be worth considering. But then I think there's other defensive players. I wouldn't be, if they picked Devontae Wyatt at number 9, it wouldn't kill me, to be honest. I'd be really chuffed to see somebody who could come in and produce some interior pass rush. But I don't think they're going to do that because I think they've loaded up their defensive line, in terms of those 5 techniques and nose tackles and threes. I think they've got their guys already.
They got Poona Ford, they got Al Woods, they signed Quentin Jefferson. It does seem... But if you were to get a good interior pass rusher, I feel like they've never really had an opportunity to take someone, to draft that highly, to find a guy who can really be that kind of an impact either.
But I think it's just a numbers game in this regard. I mean, you've brought in Shelby Harris, and I
didn't even mention Shelby Harris. Yeah,
and Quentin Jefferson, and you know that they like Ford and Monet and Woods. So eventually you kind of have to go, who you're cutting out of that group. There isn't really anybody there. And, how many of these guys are you actually going to have in the team? So I don't think they will go in that direction. The same goes for Jordan Davis. Obviously, he's a very, very good player. I think it's, again, there are sort of 3 or 4 really good defensive players that I'd be happy for them to take. And I'll say what I don't want them to do in a minute, but I think trading down and then looking at some other options in the teens isn't the worst idea in the world, Brandon. I think what they're going to do, this is my guess, This is what I'm guessing they're going to do. I think that their ideal top pick will be the best offensive or defensive lineman available when they select. So I think it's going to be a trenches player one way or another, O-line or D-line. That's how they built it before. In 2010, 2011, they focused on the offensive line. There weren't really great defensive linemen available, so it wasn't really a choice. It was defensive linemen are there. And I think that's what they're going to do. And I think if the pass rushers have got it at 9, I think they probably trade back a little bit. And then who are the best defensive linemen in the teens? I think that one name to really keep an eye on is Zion Johnson at Boston College. He has everything that they look for physically in terms of explosive traits. He's the 9th most explosive offensive lineman to enter the league since 2016.
Oh, wow.
His agility testing is, around a 4.4 short shuttle, which is unbelievable. He's got 34-inch arms, great size, proportionate athlete. He's not top heavy. He's not, big on the bottom, but skinnier up above. If an offensive lineman can be skinny up above. He's well proportioned. He kind of looks like an offensive tackle. He plays left guard, so you can move Damien Lewis over to right guard. Pete Carroll dropped a big hint last week when he said, yeah, and we've got Phil Haynes, who's competing with Gabe Jackson to start. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because an alarm went off in my head that said, Gabe Jackson's not going to be here very long. Because after June 1st, they can make a big saving by moving him on. So, I mean, if they don't draft
maybe
Zion
a trade
Johnson,
chip too.
7th round or something, I think, just to move him on, get some, I think it saves some like $6 million if you do that. So I just thought, look, there's always a chance that they don't draft the guy, they keep them, and that's it. It becomes a draft hedge that's already on the team. But when he said that, when he declared that essentially Gabe Jackson was competing for a job, in my mind, I was thinking, that's interesting. They might draft somebody to fill that role. And like I said, Damien Lewis is better at right guard. Zion Johnson's a left guard. And I'm just saying that he ticks every box that they look for physically. He's a 2-time team captain. He had a good Senior Bowl. He's got positional versatility, which we know they like. I could see them moving into sort of the 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 spot and taking Zion Johnson. He will not get past 21, by the way. I know see people sort of mocking him in the late first. Zion Johnson will not get past the Patriots at 21. So I think maybe they will move back a bit and they will look at him. So you've got your defensive linemen, your Thibodeau's, your Jermaine Johnsons, your Devontae Wyatts, your Jordan Davises. I think Derek Stingley and Sauce Gardner could be an option. If not, I think you move down and target the best offensive lineman available.
Who's not named Tyler Linderbaum because you hate him.
No, exactly. and the thing is, I was going to actually mention that I think Linderbaum could be, because that was the other thing that Carroll said. I don't know if you've read the blog recently, Brandon, but in the same interview that Carroll did at the owners meeting,
he said we're loaded at center, Rob.
Yeah,
he said we're loaded.
He says a lot of things, doesn't he? He gets carried away. That in itself, Brandon, is a bit of a tell, because we are loaded at center. We're like, he might as well have a sign over his head saying, "Hey NFL, we are not taking a center." I got you. We did, because that's the thing, and he went up.
That
on
would be
podium.
The only explanation for why he said what he said.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the kind of thing that a coach says at this time, isn't it? We're loaded at center. We love Austin Blythe. Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah,
But then he goes on to say, we're trying shorter. He gives away too much information. We're trying a shorter center now. We tried the 6'5" guys. We're going to try a 6'2" guy instead now. So we think that'd be better for us in our scheme. And Blythe, he's a great wrestler. He's wrestling. Oh my word, his wrestling background is so appealing to us. And I'm sat there and I'm thinking, okay, Tyler Linderbaum, 6'2", has all of this. He's basically got the same body as Austin Blythe, same arm length. He's actually got longer arms than Austin Blythe, and everyone knocks Linderbaum for his short arms. So he's got the same kind of length, same height, same body type. Was an amazing wrestler in high school. It might as well just have a Tyler Linderbaum T-shirt on when he's saying this. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that if they trade down and they target Tyler Linderbaum,
sure.
But given that Tony Pauline was reporting last week that Linderbaum's stock is because he's not worked out, he's not done anything, he's not even done a bench press, which is weird because his injury's not upper body. He's not done anything, and he's small and he's undersized, and he's very scheme specific. Some teams will not consider him because of the size. He might fall into round 2, so they might not have to take him in round 1. He might be sort of there 40, or maybe you move up a little bit and take him, because trading back into the end of the first round is pretty cheap. You can do it for a 4th, and if you move down, what I think might happen, Brandon, you move down a bit from 9, you move up a bit from 40 to get the guys that you want. To me, it doesn't seem very likely that they would go guard center with their first 2 picks.
Right.
But in a roundabout way, I can kind of see it because, you are getting 2 offensive linemen who are really good that a lot of people grade. Like, I was watching somebody's analysis of Zion Johnson recently, and they said he's the best guard to enter the league since Quentin Nelson. And I'm thinking, if you get that guy, guard doesn't sound like a foundational block, but if you get that level of guard, then it can be, can't it? And if you get a Creed Humphrey at center, a player who can play up to that sort of standard, and you want to run the ball, Brandon, and you want to play that kind of offense, it somewhat makes some sense, doesn't it, to have that sorted? And then you bring back Dwayne Brown, and then you maybe have Brown, Zion Johnson, Tyler Linderbaum, Damien Lewis, and whoever at right tackle, and you think, well, actually, that's not a bad plan. That actually does make some sense. That is an offensive line that's got potential for the future,
right?
And can work within the identity of this team. So, listen, I'm throwing these. I still think if Jermaine Johnson's there at 9, it might be a done deal. They just take the guy,
right?
But I do think there is an argument to be made for moving back. And the one, sorry, this has been a very long answer, but the one thing I don't want them to do is take a left tackle. And I've increasingly found myself drawn into some Twitter arguments recently. There was this one guy but I don't know if he's an ex-player or something who was absolutely hammering me on Twitter yesterday because I said that Charles Cross is a limited athlete.
What, like a B plus?
Well, for me, I think he's probably a late first, early second round type player. And it's not, Daniel Jeremiah's got him ranked 23rd on his board. Ranzilian has him ranked, I think, 18th to 19th. So it's not a preposterous opinion to have him sort of in that range. And that's why I've been mocking him, late teens.
Okay.
He's
because Evan Neal's going to go before the Seahawks pick.
He's going to be a guard, by the way. I think we maybe tried at tackle, but I think he will kick inside. The comparison,
Ekwonu is the other one, right?
Yeah, and I think he'll be a guard too. But with Evan Neal, the comparison someone who I really like said to me was, he said Brandon Scherf. That Evan Neal can be Brandon Scherf. That's the kind of level of player you will get from Evan Neal. So he thinks that he will go inside to guard and will play really well at guard for 10 years. And Ekwonu, I think, is also going to be a guard. He's got a guard's body. And I think they could be really, really good guards, by the way. I think you put Ekwonu next to Andrew Thomas in New York, for example. I think that could be a left side for the ages almost. It's a really good duo to help the Giants rebuild their offensive line. So I just don't want them to go, look, the tackles for me, I don't think... You don't see
a lot of elite tackles is what it sounds like.
That's it. Charles Cross jumped to 26-inch vertical. I'm sorry. I mean, come on. His agility testing's not good. He ran a 4.6 in the short shuttle. Abraham Lucas ran a 4.4. Zion Johnson ran a 4.4. This guy runs a 4.6. He's not big. He's not the biggest guy. He's just over 300 pounds. He doesn't look... his stature is not that big at all. He plays in the air raid offense. I don't see him in the top 10. I don't know why people are talking about him in the top 10. Yet nearly every mock draft that I read these days has him at 9 to Seattle. And the Seahawks, if the Seahawks draft someone who jumps a 26-inch vertical in the top 10, I will eat the hat that I am wearing right now. And yet, you just see it over and over again. I'll turn the radio on, and somebody who doesn't cover the draft will go, I think Charles Cross would be a great pick for Seattle. And it's like, what? That's not the kind of guy that they draft. I'm sorry. And I can't get excited about him. And Trevor Penning, look, he's much more like the player he's explosive. He's very athletic. He's massive. That's a Seahawks tackle right there. But I just think there are too many question marks. He needs so much technical refinement that I think what might happen, Brandon, is he gets into the league, he gets a go at tackle, and he just isn't good enough to make it stick. And then he gets bumped into guard. And if you're going to end up with a guard anyway, I'll take the guy with a flawless physical profile and the two-time team captain, and Tyler Linderbaum, who fits your scheme and does what you want to do at a very high level. That's just my preference for that.
Well, from a national perspective, covering this over the years, Rob, that people, they go, well, Dwayne Brown is old. The Seahawks need a left tackle. Who's the best guy that could be available in that range? It's Cross. Okay, put him in the Seahawks spot. It's just like, over the past couple of years, the Seahawks, they got rid of Richard Sherman. They need a cornerback, so let's mock a cornerback to the Seahawks in round one. Yeah. And, just in time for us to get the national media off cornerback, maybe that's what happens this year.
Well, you're absolutely right. And look, it's not to have a go at anybody. As someone who writes mock drafts, generally, I spend far too much time on the mock drafts. My wife is the most patient woman in the world. The amount of time I've spent, more time on the blog this year than I've ever done. At times I don't have any sort of free time at the moment. It is basically day job, then other day job, night job. And, that includes a lot of constantly thinking about your next mock draft. If I'm not writing an article or doing an interview or watching some tape, I'm sort of plotting. I was doing it before we jumped on here. I was plotting out a mock draft with some trades, and you sort of play around with it and you do this. And I spend too much time on it trying to sort of make it look right. But there are some people out there who haven't got the time and actually have a life, and they just want to sit down and write a mock draft in an hour. And they don't want to sort of fiddle with it for a week or 2 weeks to get it just right before publishing it. And they will go, right, okay, what do the Falcons need? They need this. Oh, he fits that. They need a quarterback, so we'll put him in there. Or do the They need a quarterback. We'll put the second best quarterback there. And then what does this player, they need a left tackle. Well, I'll just put this guy because I've heard of him. So I'll put him there. And that's what you get.
Right.
That's how most mock drafts are done. That's why you see Malik Willis at number 9 or Charles Cross at number 9 all the time. The people who are making these picks they've not spent time studying this. They've not thought about this very much at all. In most parts, they've just thrown a name out there.
Why do you hate Malik Willis, Rob?
Well, listen, on Malik Willis, because look, this is going to be a big discussion, isn't it, for the next 3 weeks? What are the Seahawks going to take a quarterback? Malik Willis is, I don't think he's a top 10 pick. I can't see the Seahawks going in that direction, Brandon. I mean, the one thing that might make them like him is the traits. It's the arm strength. He looks like he seems to be a very charismatic guy.
Yeah.
So I can imagine him going into a locker room and everybody sort of really taking to him. So he's got that going for him, obviously. Got a strong arm. He's athletic. He can make plays with his legs. He's strong. His legs are like tree trunks. Huge legs, very physically powerful player. But when you actually put on the tape, I just cannot imagine. Look, there was a big thing in 2010 or 2011 rather, that even if Jake Locker was there for the Seahawks, they wouldn't take him. And I kind of feel the same way about Malik Willis right now, because Malik Willis will be in the pocket and will be staring down an open receiver running right down the middle. I'm going to say open. I don't mean he's gained separation. I mean, he's on his own. Like he's stood on his own, waving at Malik Willis.
Right.
Saying, throw me the ball, because it's Liberty. They're not playing, they played Ole Miss and Heath had 3 interceptions and was sacked to 700 times. When they play the weaker teams, they're not playing great opponents. And the receiver's there, and Willis doesn't throw it and takes off and runs. And when he played Ole Miss, they just went after him time and time again. He was sacked, Brandon, 51 times in 2021. Oof. And if you think Russell Wilson sacks himself a lot, wait till you see Malik Willis. I mean, all of the worst things of Wilson, I'm not going to throw, I'm going to try and scramble, I've taken a huge 15-yard sack. That Malik Willis does it times like 100. Like they're worse. And then they're not throwing over the middle because, for whatever reason that Wilson did. He does that worse. Like, you can't go from Russell Wilson to Malik Willis. You just can't. Their next quarterback has to be able to do the things that Wilson, he's got to play on time. He's got to be able to get the ball out. And look, of the group of quarterbacks that are in this draft, the one that is best equipped to do that is Matt Corral. But look, the Seahawks will have to be sold on Matt Corral to take him in the top 50, I think. I think they would have to go, we really, really have to have this guy, because if they don't feel that way, they just won't take him. They will move on to next year. I'm convinced that John Schneider is going to be smitten with Bryce Young and Will Levis. I imagine that they may well be about. I'm not a huge CJ Stroud fan, but a lot of people are. And the buzz is already, I think Ohio State quarterbacks I'd run a mile from, frankly. But Bryce Young is something else. And Will Levis, I mean, I just think, I feel like I'm the Will Levis fan club, but if you just go and put his, clips into YouTube, you tell me what you see. For me, he's Josh Allen level player. That's the kind of player you're going to get without some of the, what are you doing, Josh, that he had at Wyoming? Like, Levis is just incredible.
See, you're already scouting guys a year out. I'm just now getting to some of these guys like, we talk Malik Willis, and then you have the guy who is probably the 180-degree opposite of Malik Willis, and that's Carson Strong.
Well, let's just hope if the Broncos do have a terrible year and end up picking in like the top 5 or something, the prospect of having Will Levis or Bryce Young at your quarterback position and Will Anderson, who's at Alabama, who is, oh my word, he is a, when they use the term generational talent, well, for once it will actually mean something. I mean, he had something like 32 tackles for a loss last season. 32. Wow. I mean, it's just, and he wears 31. And there's only one reason why players wear 31. That's because they like Cam Chancellor. So
I was hoping you were going to say that.
So I think he plays with that kind of attitude, and his personality is one of, just grit, determination. He's got a deep voice, which I was like, he's just, Anyway, that's about next year. But I just cannot imagine in any way, shape, or form that the Seahawks are going to look at Malik Willis and go, yeah, that really raw quarterback who makes the kind of mistakes that Wilson did, but in a much worse way. We'll take him at 9, sit him for a year, and then build the team around him next year. I mean, that doesn't really make sense.
No, especially when you have the option to build within the trenches.
And just, and this quarterback class is very strange because people are now talking themselves into Desmond Ritter being Ritter. Like someone sent me a tweet earlier saying, is Desmond, what do you think of Desmond Ritter? Is he the most pro-ready? I was like, none of them are pro-ready. There's no, saying they're more pro-ready is saying, which ocean is the driest? It's not, you've not got a pro-ready quarterback in this group. People for some reason, Desmond Ritter seems to be like the Twitter darling at the moment. But, the guy could go a half of football throwing all over the place and then throw an amazing touch pass with velocity down the middle to a tight end against Notre Dame. And you go, wow, what a pass. But then the first 10, 15 passes in that game were all over the place. So, I just think you build your team up, you wait. Caleb Ellerbee is a player who he's limited physically in terms of his athleticism. He's not going to be like scrambling around all over the place, making huge plays. But you get the ball downfield, and they'll know all about him because he was D. Eskridge's quarterback last year, so they'll have seen a lot of what he can do. And they obviously like D. Eskridge, so they may well like the guy who was throwing him the football. And Jack Cohen at Notre Dame, I think they messed him around in Notre Dame this year. He goes through his progressions very well. He's tall. He's mobile enough. He's not going to be a scrambler. But, in the kind of way that Joe Burrow just extends plays, he's kind of got that level of athleticism. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you last time, Brandon. I've certainly mentioned to a few people who I've talked to recently. People should go and watch the Virginia Tech game because Notre Dame were at Virginia Tech, tough place to go. And they were leading somewhat comfortably. They had the game in control. And Brian Kelly, the absolute nugget, took out his starting quarterback and put the freshman in to give him some snaps on the road. He throws a pick six straight away and then throws another interception. And all of a sudden, a comfortable Notre Dame lead becomes an 8-point deficit. And with 4 minutes left in the game, I don't know how Brian Kelly got the LSU job. Brian Kelly turns back to Jack Cohen and goes, right, Jack, I know that we took you out of the game when you were winning, but
get back in there.
We're down by 8 now, and there's 4 minutes left. You've got to get back out there. And all Jack Cohen did was go out there, lead a touchdown drive in 4 minutes, throws the 2-point conversion, tie game, defense gets a stop, ball comes back to Notre Dame. Jack Cohen leads them on a field goal drive. They win the game. Now, I want a quarterback who plays with that level of, okay, just put it on my back. I'll go out there and sort this mess out. I think he's got some balls. And he may never be anything more than a backup quarterback in the next level. But if you're talking about throwing someone into the mix and saying, go and see if you can win a job here, son, I think he would be as good a bet as any quarterback in this class.
Are there any of the other kind of second tier guys that, because I do feel like Corral is talked about as one of the top guys, Malik Willis, but, I mentioned Carson Strong, there's Sam Howell, you talked about Ritter. Do you see any of those guys kind of being available maybe in that early second round that Seattle might like?
No. I think that Malik Willis will go to Pittsburgh, either with their native pick or maybe they'll move up, into the teens to get him. I think Matt Corral, I like the idea of the Titans drafting Matt Corral at 26. The Titans don't have a lot of holes. Ryan Tannehill is 34 this year. I think I'm right in saying. He's either 34 now and turns 35 in July, or he's 33 now and will turn 34 in July. But either way, he's in his mid-30s. Corral cannot start in year one. He needs at least a couple of years to sort of get his feet under that. So you could say you draft Corral now, you give him a couple of years to learn the system, with no pressure to start. That'd be a real, and Tennessee are not planning to be, in the top 10 next year, are they, or the next couple of years? So it's not as if they're in a position to go and draft a franchise quarterback. It'd be a nice progression plan for them to have, one in the chamber with Matt Corral. So I think that'd be good for them to take him in the late first. I don't know where Kenny Pickett's going to go. He's a hard quarterback to place, quite frankly. Desmond Ritter, I think, will probably go at some point in round 2. I think the Falcons, with their late second-round pick, is a good place for him to go. I mean, apart from the fact he's basically got the same frame as Marcus Mariota and some of the same positives and same negatives, that would just seem like a good fit for him. I think Howell, for me, is I don't see him. I think he could last deep into day 2. I don't see much to be excited about.
He was one of the guys, I feel like, a year ago that we were talking about being a potential top 10 guy.
He's basically a poor man's Baker Mayfield. I mean, he's
he
short.
Even kind of looks like a poor Baker Mayfield.
He's like 6 foot. I mean, he looks small and stubby. There's nothing spectacular about his arm, particularly. When you watch him on tape, he's not an exciting player to watch. They had him running he ran for 1,000 yards last year because they basically had him running quarterback draws all the time. And I was like, what is this? It's not Michael Vick. It was like watching Baker Mayfield run draw plays over and over and over again. And then, in the pre-draft process, he's just not stood out in any way. I just don't see any shot of him being a franchise quarterback. So I don't see why you would take him any earlier. I mean, I've got him in round 4, I think. I think that's kind of the range where would be reasonable. Carson Strong has had a horrible pre-draft process. He's got knee injuries anyway, a knee issue, like the bone-on-bone knee issue, which means that he might even go undrafted, frankly. But he hasn't done himself any favors. And he's a statue in the pocket. He is a statue. He can't move. So,
yeah.
There's no chance of him sort of scrambling around, and teams want that now.
But as a result, he does get rid of the football quickly. I mean,
he's got a good arm, but they're basically, that's basically it. I don't think anybody else will be drafted apart from that. I mean, I don't think Bailey Zappi and Brock Purdy, for example, are going to be drafted. So
another guy who may go undrafted, but a local name. Have you watched any of Eric Berrier?
I've not. A few people have mentioned him. I've not watched him. I'm kind of running through a list of obscure names that I've kind of set aside to watch, and found some interesting players through that list. But I will add him.
He's definitely got some Russell Wilson qualities to him, so I can see that Seahawks fans, who cross over as Eastern Washington fans, I could see where they would make that connection.
I've not watched him, but I just don't think this is the draft. And look, I just think this is my honest opinion, and I can honestly say that a lot of people watch. I have watched more tape on the players this year than I have ever done before. I feel comfortable with the opinions on the certain players. I've done a deep horizontal board. I'm looking at it right now. I think that this is a draft where you do, from a Seahawks point of view, you say, let's get better up front. Let's get better up front, whether that is pass rush, offensive line. Let's make sure we improve those trenches. And I think they will take a running back in round 3. I think that is going to happen because I don't know Chris Carson's going to come back. I mean, the fact that they keep talking about him maybe retiring is an alarm for me. I think maybe they already know what he's going to do. And it's handy for them not to show that hand before the draft. I keep thinking Damian Pierce has got Seahawks written all over him just because of the way he plays. He runs, and his running style and his play is very similar to that of Thomas Rawls. He's kind of got that same fire and tenacity about him, and they need
that. So that's another argument for me against trading DK Metcalf, because of the players on offense, I feel like the only one who has fire and tenacity right now, barring whether or not Carson can come back or not, is DK Metcalf.
I think you need some of that. I think that I think that Damian Pierce could definitely. I mean, look, people will have seen the play by now, but the play where his helmet comes off and he still finishes the run and runs into the end zone, as other defenders are hitting him with their helmets on, and he just sort of celebrates, and it is as if he looks as if he could have played the game without the helmet. Frankly, I mean, as if he'd have asked him to, he'd have done it. So I think that's just kind of the attitude that this team is going to go for, and he's there kind of running back. And look, I think sort of getting that physical toughness up front, I think that's why another reason why I think they'll like Tyler Linderbaum. Like I've been watching a lot of Tyler Linderbaum this week since I've decided that he may well be a target because of what Carroll said. and look, Brandon, I'll be honest with you. You watch him play, and half the snaps, because he's only 6'2" and 290 pounds, he gets pushed back. But then on the other half, you think he's scrappy, aggressive, street fighting, center who in Seattle's, and he loves to get to the second level. And in Seattle's new blocking scheme, you can see him fitting like an absolute glove. So yeah, and he's another, tenacious physical player. Jermaine Johnson is. The linebackers. This linebacker.
We haven't talked linebacker, Rob, and I've been wanting to ask you about this because when we talked last time before the combine, there's that one thing that they look for, the short shuttle with linebackers, the low fours, and I haven't had a chance to ask you which linebackers then are really going to be on the Seahawks radar based on their short shuttles.
There was a report that Channing Tindall ran a 4.05 at his pro day, which is right up, it's the Cody Barton level of short shuttle, which they've gone for in the past, the Kevin Pierre-Louis short shuttle. That's the time. There was a report that Leo, I don't know, listen, you hear a lot of things from pro days. Leo Chanel supposedly ran in a 3.9s, like a 3.97 or something. So I think that's probably unlikely, but add 0.5 of a second on to it. He's still in a 4.0 short shuttle. So those two guys are in the range, and they are both aggressive, physical players. Chanel is a perfect fit, I think, for a 3-4 that's aggressive. I spoke to Coach Jim Levitt recently to ask him a little bit about the 3-4 defense, because it's not a system. I mean, I'm not an X's and O's guy, Brandon. So, I like to ask people who know a bit more about it and try and learn something from them. And what he was basically saying is, there's a lot of pressure on your cornerbacks in the 3-4, which is another reason why they might take a cornerback early, because essentially you want to put your 7 defenders in the box and defend the run, and you want to go for it that way. And if they're going to, and I think what they're going to do, and this scheme is ideal for Jamal Adams, and I think if you are going to trade what you did for Jamal Adams, you're going to have to play this scheme, and it's you basically put him up in the box, and you go to the opponent. Okay, guess who's coming on this pass rush,
right?
Because you're never going to be able to tell, and that's
could
what
be
Greg
Jamal.
Williams,
it could be Darrell Taylor. It could be one of these other young guys.
Who's going to drop, and who's going to rush? So you have Jamal up, you have your linebackers up in the gaps, you've got your 2 outside linebackers as your pass rushers, and it could be just a basic rush with the outside edge. It could be a linebacker. It could be Jamal Adams. It could be different people. They could all go. But you're never going to be able to tell, because we're not going to telegraph anything at the line of scrimmage. You are just going to have to pick your poison and hope that you beat our blitz and that you get the ball out quickly. And that's why there's the pressure on the cornerbacks to stick, because we're coming. It's just coming from somewhere. What is it going to be? You've got to get the ball out quickly, and you've got to produce good man coverage. So that if you're going to put Leo Chanel up in the box, I mean, you just watch his tape. He's in the backfield all the time. He had an incredible number of tackles for a loss last year for Wisconsin, and a high number of sacks, because he was just head down aggressive. Can he drop as well? Who knows? But if he's running a 3.9 or a 4.0 short shuttle, you would think he'd be pretty good at that. Channing Tindall's the same. He can be very aggressive, attack. He can sit. He can run to the ball carrier, flies around the field. If they want to start Cody Barton next year, because that might happen whoever they draft, they didn't throw Jordan Brooks into the mix, did they? They sat Jordan Brooks for a period of time. If they want to do that with who they pick here, Tindall's an exceptional special teams player. So if nothing else, you're going to get that value from him. So they are the 2 players that I've kind of focused on the most. I still think Quay Walker, who ran a 4.2 short shuttle, it's not great, not bad. I think he's the type of player that I like as well. He's got a great character, great leader, great personality, very productive on a great Georgia defense as well. It was an embarrassment of riches for them that they had Tindall, Quay Walker, and Nakobe Dean, and they had to rotate the 3 linebackers because they couldn't get them all on the field in their scheme. It was remarkable. But then, you go down the list. There are other players, Chad Muma, Troy Anderson, Brian Asamoah. There are people in this linebacker class. I'm not a huge Devin Lloyd fan. I think Christian Harris' bark's better than his bite. I think that if you go into day 3, I think there's options there, Brandon, if they don't want to take one in the first 2 rounds. There's a player that I've been watching just today, Devin Harper, who no one's talking about. I think in round 4, round 5, he's explosive, he's quick, aggressive, violent player. that no one's talking about. He could be an option there. You've got Malcolm Rodriguez, Jack Sanborn, Jeremiah Moon, I thought played well at Florida, Micah McFadden, Nate Landman, who was named as the Hammer at Colorado. They're going to get a really good linebacker. And this is why I think they were so willing to move on from Bobby Wagner, because if there was ever a draft to go and get a linebacker, it's this draft. You haven't got that Devin Smith who's going to go in the top 10. You haven't got a Luke Kuechly who's going to go in the top 12. But you've got players, day 2, day 3, it's fill your boots time. You can even justify taking a couple of linebackers from this group. They're that good. So
we need to listen for Pete to talk about how much he likes Cody Barton, for example.
I think he already has. I think that John has. John's been saying Cody Barton's amazing. So
That's true.
I think, look, it is that kind of draft class. That's where you're, linebacker, certain aspects of the offensive line, certainly the defensive line. Obviously, it's an amazing receiver draft, and that may play into your decision with DK Metcalf. I was talking to somebody recently, again, who I trust, who will know more about the draft than I'll ever know, and they thought there were up to 30 players in this class alone, receivers that is, who could produce day one impact, that could come in and impact an offense and produce quickly straight away. And I think that'll be playing on the Seahawks' mind as well, that they might feel that they can get a receiver in round 3 or in round 4 who obviously is not going to be DK Metcalf, but can do some of the things they need to do. And we also have to remember that when Seattle was winning Super Bowls, it was an undrafted free agent receiver next to an undrafted free agent receiver, Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse, and Ricardo Lockett, who was an undrafted free agent receiver. Yeah. And they brought Sidney Rice in as a free agent, and he was injured quite a lot. And they had Golden Tate, who was a round 2 pick. So there are many different ways to produce. Again, if there was no cap or anything like that, and if they had, maybe their Jamal Adams pick, you sort of think, well, you've got enough stock there. You don't need any more. You don't need to. But with DK Metcalf, you think, well, if you could turn him into a great O-liner and a great D-liner, let's say, or an O-liner and a quarterback, or an O-liner and I don't know. You see what I mean? And you've also got $20 million saved for next year. That's why I'm kind of in the middle. If the Seahawks trade him, I'll go, okay, interesting. What's he got? Let's have a look at the compensation. If they sign him, I'll go, no, good. They've re-signed DK Metcalf. Cool. I like DK Metcalf. It's kind of like, that's how I
Sure. Yeah, you would understand it either way. But they got to spend their money somewhere. So spending it on DK, they tend to spend their money on players that come up within the system and become good players. So yeah, I think
I genuinely think that. Look, some Seahawks fans. I was reading something earlier today it was Seahawks fans were saying, what are they doing to us? What's next? I can't take any more of this. Fans who've been impacted by Wilson and Wagner leaving, and I think Metcalf's going to leave. But I think this is sport. This is team sport. Players move around.
Part of that reaction is being a fan, Rob. That's what you do. We were talking, before we came on about how this is the month to really be excited about the draft. So yeah, we're kind of getting over that emotional impact of guys moving on, and we had emotional impacts of guys moving on. Even when it's guys who are, Shaquille Griffin and Shaquem Griffin. That had an emotional impact, I think, for fans when they moved on, just because they're great dudes.
For me, the only players that I would sort of build around, so just to look back in time, obviously a franchise quarterback, but I think players who can produce a heart for your team more than anything. And for me in football, that's not just players who are good people necessarily or produce consistently. That's people like Marshawn and Cam, because they set everything else up. It's just their impact can never be diminished. If as far as I'm concerned, everything was as it was because of those. There's no LOB without them. There's just not, because they set that attitude and that tone. And the Seahawks have got to try and it's incredible. It's impossible. I remember writing an article after the New York Giants game in 2014, and straight after the game, I don't think I wrote a post-game thing. I just wrote, one day the Seahawks are going to have to replace Marshawn Lynch, and it's going to be the toughest thing they ever have to do. And I think it's proven to be true. People don't like to think about it that much because he's just a running back. But he wasn't just a running back for Seattle. And they've been trying to find that same energy since. And I look, and I don't think they ever will. I think Marshawn Lynch is, for me, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, because I don't think people look at the stats and go, oh, well, he's only this.
He doesn't have as many yards as Frank Gore.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. There's no LOB without him. There's no LOB. There's no, the NFL without Marsh. You can't tell the story of the NFL without Marshawn Lynch. And you can't tell the story of the Seahawks. I think that's a much
better litmus test for Hall of Fame type players, for sure.
Yeah. And he, and the Seahawks they're still trying to find something, and he doesn't have to be a running back, but they're still trying to find that sort of somebody who can bring everything together. And I don't think it's in this draft. I love Dameon Pierce, but I don't think you're ever going to find another person like that. I don't think you're going to have to just build it differently, I suspect. But you've got to have something like that. They've got to come out of this draft with, this is why I think it's a trenches draft. You've got to set the table for everything else, then insert the quarterback. And it doesn't want to be a Baker Mayfield or somebody like this. It wants to be, like I say, a Will Levis next year, a Bryce Young who is young, talented, who can just come in, and you've created the platform for them to succeed. And I think we've seen that the way to, if Jimmy Garoppolo can get to a Super Bowl, and within 10 minutes of a second Super Bowl, because the Niners can essentially run the ball and rush the passer, then if you can create an environment where your next quarterback, probably drafted next year, has the ability to have a running game and a pass rush, then the Seahawks don't have to be bad for very long. They could be good again in 2023. So that's what we're going for.
I've dealt with the Baker Mayfield slander to this point, but that's the exact argument that I would make for the Seahawks getting Baker Mayfield this offseason.
I think the problem with Mayfield, look, I've never been against Baker Mayfield in Seattle. Part of me thinks it'd be quite interesting to watch that play out, and see how it goes. I think the problem is the Browns are an absolute shambolic franchise with an owner who is an embarrassment, frankly. I think that they are an embarrassing franchise. If I was a Browns fan, I would be, a lot of people feel like I've been horrendously miserable about the Seahawks for the last few years. Well, if I was a Browns fan right now, I'd be 10 times worse than that. I think they're an absolute disgrace, frankly, that whole franchise, what they've done, the way they've handled their business, the way they've appointed their coaches, their GMs, the way that, if they were going to try and trade for Deshaun Watson, they should have tried to trade Baker Mayfield first. Absolutely. Because they might have got some value for him. What they actually did was full court press on Deshaun Watson, give him a ridiculous contract. There's the moral argument for trading for Deshaun Watson in the first place. They might not have him for this season if he gets suspended. And while all that's going on, you tell Chris Mortensen that you want an adult at quarterback, essentially screwing yourself for any kind of trade leverage value by insulting the man as you try to get another team to take him on. We think
Deshaun Watson is more of an adult at quarterback than Baker Mayfield is what they're saying.
What an absolute joke of a franchise. And then they turn around to teams and go, yeah, what we'd like is a second-round pick for this player who's going to cost you $18 million that we want to get rid of. And you've only got him for 1 year. And if he plays well, you'll have to pay him $40 million a year. And if he doesn't play well, you've wasted a second-round pick. But can you give us one anyway? It's just, they've backed themselves into a corner where all it is damage limitation for the Browns at this point. We don't want to cut him because we know he's going to end up in Pittsburgh.
Right.
So we can't cut him and just eat that. But what do we do? How do we get out of this now with our fans not calling us out on this? There's nowhere to go for them. There's absolutely nowhere to go for them. He's going to end up going somewhere for probably, a 6th or 7th round pick so they can get something, with the Browns paying most of his salary. Now, I'm totally down for that, by the way. If the Seahawks get him for like a 6th and
they're paying some of his salary
and they're paying $3 million for him,
yeah,
fine by me, and you have him for a year and you judge it at the end of the year. But, definitely not for $18 million. They can't even afford that, Seattle. They've got about $15 million to spend. They haven't got any tackles. They're going to have to re-sign Dwayne Brown eventually. if not Brandon Shell as well, which will take up nearly all of their remaining cap space. So, they have to get him for really, really cheap. And the only thing I'd say, though, Brandon, is, I think you do run the risk with Mayfield is that he could come in and have not a great year, but a good year, let's say. And then what do you do? Because, it's difficult because, you've just got into this position where you've got all this cap space and you're doing this and you're making these changes. And then you could end up very quickly in a situation whereby you don't want to lose Mayfield, but you don't want to pay him money. It could become a bit of a wrangle. What if the whole locker room gets behind him and then you just sort of not move on from him and just let him walk and go somewhere else? What if he goes to the Niners or whatever, something like that? You see what I mean? It becomes it's a very complicated decision, which is ultimately why no one's done it yet. But the Browns just eat this situation. It's totally unfair on Baker Mayfield. They are making
especially the guy took them from an 0-16 franchise, took them to the playoffs, got a playoff win. Just in the last 4 years, does he have, let's see, has Russell Wilson won a playoff game in the last 4 years?
No. And it was a good win. And it was a great win. I mean, it's just, I feel almost ashamed for them, that they've handled it this poorly. And this will go wrong for them, that, ownership matters. And they're being led by, as we would say over here, a bunch of plonkers, really. They're just, it's not, I don't know what they're doing, and they will Mayfield will go before the draft. Either he'll be cut or dealt for something very, very small. But there's no way out for them. They're not going to get a high pick. They are going to have to eat, if not all of his salary, most of it. They should just get on with it now, draw a line under it, and allow everybody to sort of just move on. The longer it goes on and on, I suspect the worse it's going to get for them, Brandon. It's a stupid situation. But look, I think the Seahawks will be, I know we're talking about Mayfield instead of the draft, but I think of all the teams, I think the Seahawks would have some interest there. There was that one minor report from Josina Anderson that said the Seahawks were put off a little bit because he went public about preferring to play for the Colts. And
then the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, I mean, that is an own goal from Mayfield and his people to start telling the media which teams he'd prefer specifically to play for, because once those teams said no thanks, mate, he's just, why do that? He'd been better off just not saying anything, frankly, or saying I'm open to any opportunity that will give me a chance to compete to start. That would not have caused any issues. So there is a chance that the Seahawks have gone, well, if they don't want to come here, then we don't really want him. But I do think that there are people. I mean, obviously there was the guy, is it Highsmith, who was with the Browns when they drafted him, who's a big supporter of his, and Mayfield getting a second chance is right up Carroll Street for what he was saying at his press conference recently. And John Schneider likes those kind of gunslinger, moxie type quarterbacks. So you could see them giving him a shot to come in and compete, but we'll see, because they're going to bring in another quarterback other than Geno Smith.
In addition to Geno, right?
Yeah, so it could be Mayfield, but it would have to be cheap salary and cheap draft picks, and it will be. It's just the Browns. I compared them about 10 days ago to a child having a tantrum, needing to come to terms with the fact that its parents are right, and essentially that's what they are. They're just sort of working through this. We've put ourselves in this crap situation with Mayfield, and eventually we're going to have to just front up and accept it.
Yeah, well, your discussion with Mike Florio, one of the things he always says, dysfunctional franchises do dysfunctional things, and I think that's a pretty good example of it. So I understand the point of any fan who says, well, yeah, but if you get Mayfield, then, gosh, he's probably, if you just look at the state of the NFC right now, he could be a top 6 quarterback in the NFC because all of the quarterback talent has moved over to the AFC. And then, so what if you do sneak into the playoffs with Baker? Then you're talking about having a draft pick then toward the end of the first round. Why not just go out there with Locke and Geno, win your 5 to 7 games, and then have a better pick next year and have maybe a better chance at more of a long-term rebuild?
Yeah, Pete will never feel that way, though. And, I get the sense that Pete almost thinks one of his greatest achievements was finishing 7-9 and winning the NFC West in 2010. and essentially, instead of picking, if they'd have lost the Rams game, they'd have picked 8th overall. And Tyrone Smith was the 9th overall pick. So just let that sink in, by the way.
Right.
And Pete probably would have got. I mean, like he coached Tyrone Smith, didn't he, at USC, so he would have known all about him. You would have liked to think that he would have drafted him to play right tackle across from Russell Okung. But by the by, they ended up picking in the 20s instead, and I think Pete was just fine with that back in the day. I don't think he had any issues with that whatsoever. So. We wouldn't
have the Beastquake either. We wouldn't have the Beastquake, Rob.
Exactly. And look, I always think, I remember when they won that Rams game, I was a little bit disappointed because I thought they needed a top 10 pick. But then when Beastquake happened, you're thinking, oh, forget it. You know, there's no draft pick ever will. You know, that's one of my favorite moments in sport. You know, it's just and you know, I know Seahawks fans will, and people in Seattle will obviously have that as a favorite moment in sport. But as someone who lives 5,000 miles away on the other end of the world, and you know, my favorite moments in sport up until that point were mostly based around English football. You know, that was for that to sort of join the list. You know, was a big deal. But yeah, so I think he'd be completely comfortable with having a Mayfield in and get into the playoffs. And they have got 2 first-round picks. So if they want to trade into the top 10, they've got the ammo to do it. They've got 2 seconds as well, Brandon. So they could easily get, if there was let's say Jacksonville are bad again, that's not a big shock. You know, they don't need a quarterback. Would they be willing to trade into the 20s for 2 firsts and a second? Probably. So you've got opportunities to move up if you want to. So I don't think there'd be any issues with that. I think Pete would love that. My issue with Mayfield is he had a great offensive line.
Great running game. Solid defense.
Nick Chubb. You know, he had Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, and you know they spent on Austin Hooper and David Njoku. He had no excuses not to be better than he was. He's never had a season with a 100 QB rating. He's never had more than I think 27 touchdowns in a year. He turns the ball over too much. He's never been
fewer fumbles though than Russell Wilson over the last 4 years.
It's just, I wish that, you know, when the Browns were good, I wish he just had one of those seasons where it was like, you know, 35 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
then they wouldn't be going after Deshaun.
No. But let's say that he had that, you know, 2 years ago, and then this year it kind of, because of the injury, he'd like regressed slightly, and they still made that move. Let's just say that, for example. Then at least you could say, well, a couple of years ago, wow, what a player. He just always felt a bit streaky to me. A bit streaky, like the performance against Seattle, kind of like, you know, when we played them a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, whatever it was, in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. And he got injured, you know, like he got hit and he like was clutching his side all the way through the game. So, and he played hurt. He had some lousy turnovers. He started the game on fire, and the Browns were like they were going to walk away with that game against Seattle. Then he had a lousy turnover. Then he got hurt and had another, and then couldn't really do much and was not playing anywhere near his best. And that to me feels like Baker Mayfield's career in a game, really. Right. And it's just, I don't know. It's hard to. I'd be intrigued by it. But
I've made the point, Rob, that every single quarterback option that I've heard anyone bring up this offseason is a bad option. And I think that Baker is the best of the bad options.
Yeah, I think it would be entertaining. You know, the Seahawks would be interesting, wouldn't they? They'd be, and I don't know if Pete would want that necessarily. I'm not sure, but I do get the sense that the Seahawks, because look, other teams have outrightly kind of gone, well, in the Colts' case, trading for somebody else. You know, there are other teams going, we don't want him, you know, like Carolina and one or two others. And I get the sense, you know, the Seahawks have never done that. They've kind of left the door open, haven't they? And I just think that they think, yep, this is right. This is the kind of thing we love to do.
Right. And where you can get him for a 5th or 6th or, some crazy low pick. And
And when Pete was talking about second chances,
I still think he might have been talking about Watson because that deal hadn't been done yet. I know we don't want to think that, Rob, but my mind goes there.
I'm convinced that they were showing interest in there. The reports were weird, weren't they, though? Because, you know, Daniel Jeremiah came out and said, oh, my buddies are saying that they're going to trade for Deshaun Watson on Twitter. And then everybody kind of said, oh, well, that's that. They're obviously all in on Deshaun Watson. And, well, remind me the last time Daniel Jeremiah broke he's not Schefter, is he? I mean, he basically, you know, he'd spoken to a few other scouts or whatever, or whoever he was speaking to in the league. And unsurprisingly, they thought 70-year-old head coach who's just traded away Russell Wilson might trade for another franchise quarterback. I think it was just sort of putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5, really. And then people like Dan Graziano were saying, yeah, the Seahawks put a call in, but they were never really that interested. And by that point, I think it had been said that Deshaun Watson, I think John McClain had basically said, Deshaun doesn't want to go to Seattle. So when Pete was saying that, I think it was a more generic point on, come and play with us. I think he was giving a recruiting pitch there. I think this is the kind of thing he's been saying to players. Come and play with us. Look at all the great success we've had turning guys around. We can help you reach a level that you've not reached so far. And I think Baker Mayfield, I think he would think, what a challenge, to try and turn Baker Mayfield into the player that Cleveland thought he was going to be when they took him with the number 1 overall pick. And I think he likes to think, on a totally random point, Brandon, I've just thought of now, I think Pete is on the lookout for the next Marshawn Lynch, which is somebody who is on a team that doesn't want him anymore, who was drafted really high, who it's just gone sour in that franchise, that he thinks he can transplant them from one franchise to his franchise, and that in his program, that player will become an elite player. I think he's on the lookout for that next project. So
sure,
Baker Mayfield fits the bill for that kind of a project. And if it's not him, could it be a Saquon Barkley? Could it be somebody like that, who he goes out and manages to acquire on the cheap, who ends up being a revelation for the Seahawks? I think Pete is dead keen on landing somebody like that. So we'll see. But I just, when people were talking about giving away a second or a third for Baker Mayfield, it was like, this is not the draft to do that. You cannot do that. And they haven't done that, and they won't do that. There are too many.
And I was probably on that. I was probably of that opinion early on too. But I can see the value in those early picks, especially allowing it to wait. And yeah, if you get them, great. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. It's fine, and see what you can do for next year. So this is going to be a fun couple weeks now, though, Rob, leading up to this draft. What do you got planned here over the next few weeks up at SeahawksDraftBlog.com?
So, a lot of coverage. I am actually going on a European road trip with my family next week. So that's going to be an interesting challenge to see how the blog motors on as I'm visiting parts of France and Belgium and Holland. And we have a bit of a crisis over here at the moment, Brandon. Usually when you want to go to Holland, you get on a ferry, which is about an hour away from my house in a city called Hull, where I used to work. And you get over on the ferry, and then you drive to where you need to go, and that's probably like an hour or two, and that's it. Now I'm having to drive all the way to the south of England, which is a 4-hour drive, go on a Channel Tunnel crossing, which is a tunnel under the ocean that connects with France, go to France. We're driving to a place in Belgium, staying overnight to break the trip up, and then going to the place we're going to go to Holland instead. So instead of it being like a 3-hour trip where we're going to go, it's going to be more like an 8-hour trip. And then to come back, you have to do the same thing. We're staying in Lille and then going up. So that is, like I say, it's going to be a challenge, a fortnight before the draft to keep this thing ticking along. But I will endeavor to do it with, project. And I've got a piece coming up soon about under the radar players that no one's talking about at all, who are not on many draft boards, and not on Lance Zierlein's grading. So they're not even on there. These are people who I haven't studied who could be interesting for the Seahawks. I've got a mock draft with a whole bunch of trades in it, which is coming out, and they're quite interesting because there are trades in the first round. I've done a few interviews already with, and people should please go and check these out. Mike Florio, Jim Lever, Scott McLuhan, they're all on there on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, and on Spotify. Just search for The Rebuild, a Seattle Seahawks podcast, or on YouTube, it's Rob Staton, which is my channel. I have got 2 interviews lined up. One I think is quite interesting, and the other will be very, very interesting if they come off. So we've kind of got a green light, but until it's done,
you don't want to jinx it.
You never know. So when it's done, I'll put it out there immediately. So that'll be coming up as well, and I'm going to try and get some interest in it. We'll have an interview with Tony Pauline as always. Tony's a fantastic guy. So we'll speak to him too, and lots and lots of content. I don't plan on sleeping much for the next 3 weeks. Yeah, I asked Mike Florio yesterday. I said, when do you sleep? Because you seem to be writing, tweeting, or recording a video all day and night. And he said he has 5 hours sleep a night. And I was thinking, yeah, that's pretty much what I've had for the last month.
You just got to find a way to work in that 1 hour nap that he does.
Yeah, I am a good napper. I could relate to that. I was nodding away. For some reason, my camera didn't film me. It just filmed Mike. But I was nodding away during that because I'm a big fan of the sort of day nap. Get your head down. If you've got nothing on, I had a great nap today. So I enjoy a nap. My wife hates napping, but I love a nap. So yeah, basically, SeahawksDraftBlog.com, the Rebuild, the Seattle Seahawks podcast. There's going to be a lot of stuff there. And then when the draft's finished, we'll react to it all. And then I will sleep then.
Can't wait to check it out, Rob. The draft is coming up Thursday, April 28th. So we are just a few short weeks away. Rob, thanks again for coming on.
Anytime, Brandon. It's always a pleasure.